One night you could hear the whole club shouting his name, and the next morning the city was whispering about who pulled the trigger. In Atlanta, that kind of shift was normal because the streets had no pause button and every move carried a price. Before YSL headlines made the news talk about rap crews like gangs, there was another name stamped heavy in the city. They called themselves Duct Tape Entertainment, and their story was built long before prosecutors started chasing lyrics. To understand how DTE became that feared, you gotta first understand where they came from. Atlanta, in the mid-'80s, was already a city of contradictions, with black wealth sitting right beside projects where families struggled daily. On the east side, areas like Edgewood, Kirkwood, and Decatur were shaping kids who would later shape the sound of the whole South. You could walk past a liquor store on one corner, a church on the next block, and still hear gunshots splitting the air at night. That was the reality Zone 6 kids woke up to, and surviving meant you had to learn fast. The city had divided its police into numbered zones, and Zone 6 became more than just a patrol district. Rappers used that number like a badge of honor, and for people living there it carried weight because it meant you were claiming a side of Atlanta with history. Vice magazine once called Zone 6 the trappest of all possible zones because it had Section 8 apartments, $500,000 condos, and abandoned buildings all mixed together. Kids learned to hustle watching that because the contrast taught them nothing was promised and everything was up for grabs. By the early 2000s, trap music was Atlanta's soundtrack, blasting out of Crown Vics and corner stores every day. Artists like T.I., Young Jeezy, and Gucci Mane were putting their stories on mixtapes, and local DJs kept that culture alive with street tapes. Sites like Live Mixtapes and Dat Piff spread those projects beyond the city, but in Zone 6 it was still hand-to-hand hustle. You had dudes selling CDs out the trunk in the morning, and then hosting a block party at night where the same tracks blasted through speakers. That routine was daily therapy for a community caught between survival and hope. Edgewood Court was one of the places that showed both sides of the story in the rawest way. Creative loafing once described kids playing near bullet-scarred walls while developers built trendy lofts just blocks away. Residents like Nikki Lawson said they knew how to hit the floor when shots rang out because that was survival instinct. At the same time, people looked out for each other, and neighbors threw cookouts where smoke from the grill mixed with the sound of trap beats. That mix of love and violence created the foundation that gave rise to groups like DTE. For young people growing up there, the lessons were not written in textbooks. They were learned outside in real time. Protect your own, show loyalty to your friends, and never look weak in front of strangers. That code shaped kids like Rashad Big Bank Best and Curtis Alley Boy Robinson, who would later become the founders of DTE. They grew up within blocks of each other, surrounded by the same chaos, and both learned early that the streets gave you nothing for free. Jail time was common, funerals were regular, but music gave them a chance to breathe. Atlanta's economy was changing after the recession hit in the late 2000s, and that shift made the grind even harder in Zone 6. The streets had fewer jobs, but more drugs, and music became a way to flip pain into something valuable. Kids idolized rappers who told their truth over hard beats because those songs felt like survival manuals. When Duct Tape Entertainment came onto the scene, they fit that tradition, but carried it with more edge because their story was not polished for radio. They came out raw, the same way the neighborhood was raw. For outsiders, Atlanta was the birthplace of Coca-Cola and the city of the civil rights movement. But in Zone 6, the reputation was different. To locals, it was the engine of trap music, the place where every rapper had to prove credibility before they could claim the city. Crews built from neighborhoods became unofficial record labels, blending family ties with business ideas. That is why when DTE eventually formed, it was not seen as a typical label. It was seen as a survival system that turned into music. The kids who would later call themselves Duct Tape learned from Zone 6 that you had to keep one foot in reality and one foot chasing a dream. That reality was police harassment on one side, gentrification pushing families out on the other, and funerals in between. The dream was building something that could outlast block beefs and hustling arrests. DTE represented both sides perfectly because they were born from an environment that celebrated resourcefulness and punished weakness. Before the name carried fear across Atlanta, it was simply the reflection of a world where contradictions created survivors. The streets of Zone 6 raised many, but one name stood taller than most. Rashad Best, better known as Big Bank Black, came up on Mason Avenue surrounded by hustle and survival. His block was a place where kids dreamed big, but often fell early to trouble. He carried himself with presence even as a young man because people saw leadership in the way he moved. By his 20s, the streets already respected his word more than many older heads. Big Bank was not the type to chase cameras, but his story was written in that neighborhood. Mason Avenue was not Hollywood Boulevard. It was trap houses, liquor stores, and boarded apartments. He learned business through hand-to-hand trades, first in the hustle, then in the bigger moves. That same knowledge later shaped how he ran a label with the same discipline. Before rap made his name public, his reputation was already cemented within Zone 6. Jail became a chapter in his life, like it did for many out there. He spent time behind walls where the noise of Atlanta streets was replaced by the sound of metal doors. Instead of letting it kill his drive, he started shaping ideas that could outlast a sentence. Inside, he thought about more than a hustle. He thought about building something permanent. Big Bank spoke about how duct tape holds things together, and that became his vision. The crew would not just be rappers. It would be a structure bonded like tape itself. When he came home, he carried that plan out with steady confidence. He linked with local promoters and DJs, pushing Duct Tape Entertainment into Atlanta's buzzing underground. Instead of waiting on radio, he focused on grassroots shows and DVDs sold directly to fans. Those DVDs showed real neighborhoods, real faces, and the lifestyle people already knew. That rawness made people feel like DTE was not acting, they were truly living it. In Atlanta, authenticity mattered more than shiny chains, and DTE earned that stamp quickly. Big Bank had connections that reached beyond the streets, which made him stand apart. His networking with labels eventually brought an Atlantic Records distribution deal, a big move for the crew. That deal did not water them down because Big Bank kept control on the direction. He wanted the money to flow, but also the respect to remain intact. For him, credibility was a currency that could not be bought with advances. DTE's projects came out with street quality intact. Even under a major system, people knew Big Bank as an OG, but he also carried another side. He was respected for his street authority, yet he became a mentor in front of microphones later. His podcast presence years later showed his ability to move from trap houses to studios. With Big Facts, he sat beside DJ Scream and Baby Jade talking about culture. He interviewed names like Jeezy, Birdman, and 21 Savage, showing his reach across generations. Younger rappers listened when he spoke because his story came from proven ground. Even in the height of DTE's run, he was always the glue. When Trouble or Alley Boy brought fire to the spotlight, Big Bank balanced it. He knew how to negotiate, how to calm situations before they turned worse, and how to keep unity strong. Every crew has someone who keeps egos from splitting it apart, and Big Bank was that person. Industry heads called him a businessman, but locals knew him as the backbone of DTE. Without him, the name Duct Tape would not have carried the same respect in Atlanta. His leadership came not from chasing fame, but from understanding responsibility. He carried his Mason Avenue lessons into boardrooms, mixing hood codes with corporate patience. Younger dudes who wanted fast money looked at him and saw discipline winning long term. His message was simple: build loyalty, build trust, and keep your circle tight like tape. For Atlanta, Big Bank represented what an OG should look like when the city kept changing. That balance of street weight and industry strategy made him a blueprint in every sense. Curtis Robinson, who the world came to know as Alley Boy, grew up with hardship written into every step. His childhood was marked by poverty, broken surroundings, and a daily grind that tested his patience. Curtis saw both violence and community in equal measure, and that shaped the way he carried himself later. He understood that survival meant fighting harder than most, and those lessons gave him the voice he would one day put on wax. When people later called him volatile, they overlooked that his fire came from surviving situations others would fold under. Alley Boy spent time in jail during his early years, and those stretches gave him nothing but time to think. Behind bars, he sharpened his mentality and found focus in ways the streets never allowed. The nickname Alley Boy came from where he ran and hustled, moving through alleys that regular folks avoided. He adopted it proudly because it reflected his roots and the places that built him. The name stuck, and by the time he started rapping, people knew him as someone who represented the corners. Alley Boy was never one for polished images because his reputation already lived in the neighborhoods. When he hit the booth, Alley Boy's delivery came out raw, unpolished, and straight from the chest. His early mixtapes were loaded with aggression, and his words painted pictures of the streets. He never tried to make pretty records because his intention was to document real life, not sell fantasies. The projects gained traction locally because listeners recognized their own stories in his verses. By the late 2000s, Alley Boy's name was buzzing heavily in Atlanta's underground circuit. His mixtape, Ninjas in the Alley, introduced him widely, and soon after he became impossible to ignore. Alley Boy was fearless with his music, and his hyper-aggressive style made enemies along with fans. He had no issue calling out heavyweights, even if they had bigger platforms than him. In one of his most notable moments, he went directly at Jeezy in tracks. At a time when Jeezy was one of Atlanta's most powerful figures, that move turned heads. Alley Boy's reputation grew because he was not afraid of consequences when speaking his truth. His approach told the industry that Duct Tape Entertainment was not trying to be industry friendly. They were representing the streets exactly as they lived them, and Alley Boy became the loudest proof. His willingness to throw punches was not limited to the booth, because he carried that same energy in person. Club fights, heated interviews, and public beefs all became part of his reputation. Many stories circulated about his temper, and the one with Young LA stood out above all. In 2011, Young LA got a duck tattoo on his face, and the imagery connected to duct tape without permission. To Alley Boy, this was disrespect and misrepresentation, and he made sure the city understood it. Videos surfaced of Young LA being confronted, beaten, and having the tattoo crossed out in black ink. That incident showed how serious Alley Boy was about protecting Duct Tape's name. To him, it was not just branding, it was survival, and the tape symbol carried too much weight to let it slide. That moment told Atlanta that Alley Boy's loyalty to DTE was uncompromising. It was not about chart numbers or fame, it was about the integrity of the brand. For people outside the city, the incident might have looked extreme, but in Zone 6 it made sense. Crews lived by codes that demanded consequences for disrespect, and Alley Boy enforced those codes without hesitation. His actions, whether in music or in the streets, showed he was always going to defend the family. That sense of loyalty made him both loved and feared in the Atlanta rap ecosystem. Despite his wild reputation, Alley Boy often opened up about struggles with his own mind. He spoke about mental health in interviews, admitting that the weight of street life wore heavy. For a man known for volatility, his moments of reflection revealed the depth behind his anger. He talked about depression, about the pressure of trying to provide for loved ones, and about trauma from growing up in violence. These confessions showed that Alley Boy was not simply reckless, but a man wrestling with survival in every way. His honesty connected with people who saw their own struggles mirrored in his words. Alley Boy also spoke about fatherhood and how having children changed his perspective on certain things. He still carried the same aggressive energy, but he tried to balance it with responsibility. In his music and interviews, he emphasized loyalty to family and the importance of leaving something behind. That sense of duty gave layers to his image, even while the public focused mostly on his volatility. He never claimed to be perfect, but he made it clear that loyalty and love for his children anchored him. His ability to show both anger and vulnerability made him stand out in a scene often defined by bravado. When it came to radio play, Alley Boy was rarely the first choice, and he knew it. His songs were not designed for mainstream spins because he never watered down his delivery. While other Atlanta rappers crafted radio singles, Alley Boy stayed true to the sound of the blocks. For every fan he might have lost in the industry, he gained 10 in the streets. He embodied what it meant to be for the streets, not for executives or radio programmers. That authenticity gave Duct Tape Entertainment its uncompromising tone, because Alley Boy set the standard early. He refused to trade credibility for exposure, and that position carried heavy respect within Atlanta. His catalog grew with projects like Definition of Finessin' and War Cry, where his raw voice never softened. Listeners knew that when Alley Boy rapped, he was speaking directly from the same trenches they lived in. His beefs continued across the years, with shots at T.I. and other figures, further solidifying his reputation. Those conflicts never stopped his momentum because his base respected his unwillingness to bow down. The mixtapes became cultural artifacts in Atlanta, capturing a period when aggression defined a large part of the underground. Alley Boy stood as the embodiment of that energy, fierce and relentless. Through all the volatility, Alley Boy remained central to the DNA of Duct Tape. While Big Bank carried the blueprint and authority, Alley brought the reckless heart that fueled the crew's aura. He was not chasing fame, he was chasing respect, and his path proved it over and over. Every altercation, every mixtape, and every stand taken for DTE built the myth larger. People may debate whether his moves helped or hurt the crew in the long run, but nobody denied the impact. His presence made DTE unforgettable because he represented the fearless side of Atlanta's rap culture. By the time Alley Boy's name reached national platforms, his identity was already solidified. He was the rapper who dissed giants, fought for his crew's name, and gave unfiltered reflections of his life. The volatility, the honesty, the loyalty, and the refusal to compromise all lived inside him. For DTE, Alley Boy became the one who made sure nobody forgot that Duct Tape held strong. His reckless energy gave the label its reputation, and his story explained why the crew carried both respect and fear. By the time Alley Boy was shaking the underground with raw energy, The idea of Duct Tape Entertainment was already moving. Big Bank carried the vision, Ali brought the voice, and together they started building the foundation. Their goal was not to chase mainstream approval, but to create something that felt real. Atlanta was crowded with new labels at that time, but DTE had a different type of presence. They carried themselves like a family before they ever called themselves a label. Grassroots hustle drove their early moves because nobody was waiting to hand them industry help. Members of the crew pushed mixtapes by hand, passing CDs at gas stations and corner stores. They pulled up at strip clubs across Atlanta, giving DJs stacks of CDs to break their records. Clubs like Magic City, Strokers, and Blue Flame were testing grounds, and DTE made sure their name rang out. Every party or concert was an opportunity, and they showed up deep, making themselves impossible to ignore. People respected the effort because they saw the crew putting in their own grind. The hustle was not just music, it was culture, with women in the circle running merchandise and tables. T-shirts, DVDs, and posters were designed and distributed by people who lived in the same neighborhoods. DTE's sessions often felt like community events, with artists, friends, and family crowding into small studios. The atmosphere was chaotic, but full of loyalty, and every track recorded came from that bond. They made the label feel like a block gathering, with people bringing food, energy, and stories into the booth. That closeness gave their music an authenticity that polished industry labels could not reproduce. The roster started to grow, and each member carried their own distinct flavor. Big Bank Black was the strategist and OG, providing stability and credibility across the city. Ali Boy became the loudspeaker, his voice carrying the streets into the industry. Trouble was the young gun, full of raw talent and destined to break wider. Veli Sosa added weight as a financial backer and steady figure within the movement. B Green brought a raspy storytelling voice that reminded people of classic Southern grit. Cocaine Judo was unpredictable and entertaining, a chaotic energy that gave life to shows. Pesci worked more behind the scenes with production and beats, shaping the sound that backed their aggression. Duct Tape Dave handled design, photography, and visuals, ensuring the brand identity was sharp and recognizable. Together, the roster looked less like a traditional label and more like a squad built from survival. Mixtapes formed the backbone of their identity, with every release treated like a statement to the streets. Ali Boy's Inward Reckoning stood out as one of the earliest defining projects filled with raw aggression. Trouble dropped early singles like Bussin', which became an anthem across Zone 6 neighborhoods. Each tape pushed the story of DTE further, reminding people that this was not manufactured. Their mixtapes hit the internet through DatPiff and live mixtapes, but the real buzz came from hand-to-hand copies. Car trunks became record stores, and word of mouth made DTE one of Atlanta's most feared crews. The grind eventually caught attention outside of Atlanta, and Atlantic Records entered the picture with a distribution deal. This was a major step for DTE, giving them access to resources beyond the underground. But even with Atlantic involved, DTE did not clean up their image or soften their delivery. Big Bank kept the same philosophy. The music must reflect the streets that built them. While some artists signed to majors lost their grassroots identity, DTE refused to compromise their authenticity. Their projects under Atlantic still carried the same edge, reminding listeners they were built from concrete, not polished offices. Local performances became legend because DTE approached shows with the same intensity as block gatherings. They brought entire neighborhoods into venues, flooding rooms with people who represented the brand. When Ali Boy or Trouble hit the stage, the energy came raw and unfiltered. Fans were not just spectators, they were part of the family, shouting every lyric like it was personal testimony. Those nights gave DTE the aura of being both a rap label and a movement. Nobody in Atlanta doubted their presence once they saw them take over a stage. Even with Atlantic behind them, the crew stayed rooted in Zone 6 traditions. They still passed out CDs, still pushed mixtapes from trunks, and still showed up heavy at strip clubs. For them, mainstream distribution was a tool, but the streets remained their primary audience. People respected that loyalty because they knew DTE would never trade the block for a boardroom. Their growth showed that success could be achieved without losing authenticity, and that message resonated deeply. The early years of Duct Tape Entertainment were not about billboard placements or radio spins. They were about proving that the crew could build something real with their own hands. Every mixtape, every grassroots campaign, and every performance built credibility that could not be faked. The foundation laid during this time became the reason DTE lasted longer than many other short-lived Atlanta labels. From Mason Avenue to Edgewood, people spoke the name Duct Tape with respect and caution. For the crew, those years were about creating more than music. They were about making DTE a name that the city could not erase. Duct Tape Entertainment was not just about Big Bank and Alley Boy, because the crew had depth. Behind every headline figure stood a team that shaped the label's story in important ways. Each member brought their own style, their own weight, and their own energy to the table. Together, they made the movement feel bigger than 2 or 3 names. The myth of DTE was built on that full cast, not only the leaders. Trouble stood out even in those early days because his raw talent was impossible to ignore. Mariel Simonte Orr was younger than most of the crew, but his voice carried maturity. His raps came with clarity, passion, and a truth that reflected his own past. While his full art came later, even then people whispered about his potential. Songs like Bussin' gave him credibility before the industry ever co-signed him. His hunger separated him from others because he balanced respect for the crew with his personal ambition. Within DTE, Trouble represented the young prodigy destined to carry the torch forward. Another key figure was Veli Sosa, who often moved quieter but carried significant influence. Veli helped finance parts of the operation, keeping resources flowing when the crew needed stability. His reputation was solid both in the neighborhood and the business side of things. While he was not the loudest voice, his role made sure projects could be completed. Money management mattered as much as rapping, and Veli provided that backbone. He also carried himself as a steady presence, giving balance when situations threatened to spiral. For the crew, Veli was a respected older figure who held things together financially. B Green gave the label a distinct sound with his raspy delivery and storytelling approach. His verses felt like conversations from the block because he spoke with grit and lived experience. While he did not always chase spotlight attention, his presence anchored many mixtapes. He became a voice fans recognized immediately, and that gave the crew identity. His songs reminded listeners of older Southern rap traditions, but with the urgency of the streets. B Green's contribution showed that DTE valued depth as much as aggression. His storytelling helped preserve the culture in music, making him an important anchor within the camp. Cocaine Judo brought another dimension entirely because his personality was unpredictable. He had a gift for bringing humor into tense situations, which gave balance to the crew. His presence on tracks and in videos often gave fans comic relief. At the same time, his chaotic energy made him stand out in unpredictable ways. Struggles with addiction added complexity to his story, showing how street life carried its own demons. Judo was not polished, but he was memorable, and that mattered in building a myth. His chaotic but entertaining persona reminded people that DTE was made of real human layers. Pesci worked more behind the scenes, but played a vital role with production and sound shaping. His beats provided the backbone for several projects, giving the crew tracks that matched their tone. While fans rarely saw him front and center, insiders knew his fingerprints were on many records. He was described as enigmatic, someone who preferred the studio over the spotlight. His influence mattered because a label without a consistent sound cannot stand strong. Pesci gave them that sound, blending heavy drums with dark melodies that matched DTE's identity. His work built an atmosphere around the music, even when his name was less visible. Duct Tape. Dave might not have rapped, but he shaped how the crew presented themselves visually. As a designer and photographer, Dave captured the look of DTE in photos and graphics. His work made sure the brand stayed recognizable. From mixtape covers to merchandise designs, he was also the archivist, recording moments that might otherwise have been forgotten. His role showed that DTE cared about image and history as much as music. Sadly, Dave's life ended in tragedy when he was killed in 2024. His death hit the crew hard because he was part of their story from early. His work left behind an archive of memories that kept the myth alive. This full roster of supporting figures showed why Duct Tape Entertainment mattered beyond 2 rappers. Trouble carried the torch for the new generation. Veli Sosa financed and balanced the grind. B Green anchored with raspy storytelling, while Cocaine Judo brought chaotic but entertaining energy. Pesci shaped the sound behind the boards, and Dave shaped the image with his visuals. Together, they created a label that felt alive in every corner, not just on records. Fans and locals alike respected that depth because it made DTE feel more like a family than a label. The story of Duct Tape was never about 1 or 2 stars. It was always about a crew that carried their city together. Mariel Simonte Orr, who the world knew as Trouble, grew up in the tough streets of Zone 6. Born on November 4th, 1987, he came from a place where survival was not promised. His childhood was filled with the daily lessons of Atlanta's East Side. Trouble was raised around Edgewood and later Decatur, 2 neighborhoods that shaped his outlook. He saw the code of the streets up close and it became part of him. Friends and family described him as sharp, loyal, and quick to stand his ground. As a teenager, Trouble got caught up in the streets with what he called his robbing crew. They were young, bold, and chasing fast money through whatever means available. He admitted later that he was living reckless during those early years. The money came quick, but the risks were heavy, with jail and violence always waiting. By his late teens, Trouble had already done stints behind bars. Those experiences taught him hard lessons, but they also gave him time to think. He began to see music as a way out, not just another hustle. Big Bank Black saw something in the young Trouble that many overlooked. He took him under his wing, offering mentorship that shaped his growth. Big Bank gave him game about the industry and the streets, helping him balance both. Trouble respected him as an OG, and their bond was deeper than just label business. Through that mentorship, Trouble gained the confidence to bring his own stories into the booth. With Big Bank guiding and Alley Boy pushing, Trouble found his lane within DTE. He was not just another young rapper, he was the heart of their new generation. In 2011, Trouble released his breakout mixtape December 17th, named after the date he was released from jail. The project became a statement piece, telling his truth with raw energy. The tape included tracks that painted pictures of his life in Zone 6. Songs like Bussin' turned into instant street anthems, blasting from cars and clubs. The title carried weight because December 17th marked his freedom and his rebirth as an artist. For Trouble, that mixtape was not just music, it was testimony. People in Atlanta could hear the difference because his voice carried pain and authenticity. The mixtape buzz spread quickly, reaching beyond Atlanta through platforms like live mixtapes. Blogs and DJs highlighted Trouble as one of the most promising new voices. His aggressive but smooth flow reminded people of Tupac and DMX, two of his biggest influences. Like Pac, he balanced pain with charisma, and like DMX, he had a voice full of urgency. He studied those artists but never copied them, keeping his delivery uniquely Atlanta. Studio footage from those early years showed him focused and intense, writing verses while laughing with the crew. His presence in the booth pulled attention because he had a natural gift for storytelling. After December the 17th, Trouble followed up with another heavy project, 431 Days. That title referred to the time he spent locked down before coming back home. The tape kept his reputation alive, showing consistency and hunger after his release. It included tracks that dug deeper into his experiences, cementing his voice in the streets. Fans respected him because he told unfiltered truths that others tried to glamorize. 431 Days showed that Trouble was not a one-hit wonder in the underground. He could follow up success with another respected body of work. That consistency helped build his image as the face of DTE's future. The song Bussin' became his breakout anthem, spreading across Atlanta neighborhoods like wildfire. The beat was simple but heavy, carrying the type of bounce that clubs demanded. The lyrics reflected his reality, with Trouble delivering in his signature tone. The track was not made for radio, but still found its way into constant rotation. DJs spun it at strip clubs and street parties, and crowds rapped every word back. Bussin' turned Trouble into a household name within Atlanta's underground. The song's impact proved that his music had the power to move beyond local corners. Trouble's influences shaped the way he presented himself, and Tupac's presence loomed large in his work. He admired Pac's ability to speak directly to people with honesty. DMX also gave him a blueprint for delivering raw emotion through voice and cadence. Trouble combined those influences with his own experiences, creating a unique brand of Atlanta storytelling. His charisma set him apart because people wanted to listen when he spoke. Even when he was not rapping, his interviews and appearances showed a natural magnetism. That charisma carried him into bigger circles because industry figures began paying close attention. By the mid-2010s, Trouble was ready for bigger stages, and Mike Will Made It stepped in. Mike Will, one of Atlanta's most successful producers, signed Trouble under his Eardrummer Records imprint. The partnership eventually led to an Interscope Records deal, giving Trouble national visibility. This was a major moment for DTE because one of their own had crossed into the industry spotlight. Trouble's rise felt like the streets of Zone 6 had a direct line into mainstream offices. Even with the major deal, his music did not lose its edge or identity. That authenticity made the partnership powerful because listeners believed in Trouble's words. Big names began to notice, and Trouble received co-signs from artists like Drake and The Weeknd. Drake mentioned him as one of Atlanta's realest, and The Weeknd respected his style. Those endorsements put Trouble in front of fans who had never heard of DTE before. For the crew, it meant their movement had officially crossed into new territories. Trouble stood as the symbol of Duct Tape's reality moving into national recognition. He showed that a rapper could represent the hardest corners of Zone 6 and still get industry respect. His rise validated DTE's grind and proved that their story could not be ignored. Trouble carried his city on his shoulders during this period, representing Atlanta with pride. Interviews showed him speaking with confidence about his upbringing and the lessons he carried. He never pretended to be polished, and that made his words even more powerful. Listeners connected because he gave them honesty instead of scripted narratives. The industry might have been watching, but Trouble never stopped rapping for the neighborhoods that built him. That loyalty to the streets gave DTE a national face while still keeping credibility intact. For Duct Tape Entertainment, the rise of Trouble was more than an artist breakthrough. It represented the possibility of street-rooted rap crossing into a wider market without losing identity. Trouble stood as a bridge between Zone 6 and the mainstream music industry. His youth, his history, his hunger, and his talent made him the perfect symbol. To the streets, he was still the same Trouble they knew. To the industry, he was the new voice of Atlanta with limitless potential. For DTE, he was the heart of the crew, carrying their name further than ever before. By the time Duct Tape Entertainment had a growing catalog, their reputation was already speaking louder than music. People in Atlanta recognized them not only for songs, but for their raw presence. The crew carried authenticity that could not be manufactured, and the streets felt it. Their image came through grainy videos, handheld DVDs, and live appearances that looked like real block scenes. Unlike polished industry crews, DTE did not chase staged images for television or executives. What you saw was exactly what existed in the neighborhoods that raised them. Street DVDs from the late 2000s and early 2010s were filled with DTE footage. Cameras caught them outside gas stations, clubs, and projects, always deep and always confident. The quality of those clips was shaky, but the energy was undeniable. Fans saw raw images of Big Bank speaking, Alley Boy freestyling, and Trouble holding the crowd. Those visuals made them appear more dangerous because everything looked uncut. They were not interested in red carpets or glossy magazine covers. Their choice of presentation reinforced the idea that DTE was street first. Beef culture was also part of their reputation, and Alley Boy led that charge. His diss tracks toward established figures like Jeezy and T.I. made major headlines in Atlanta. At the time, both men were giants in the city, holding mainstream respect. Alley Boy went directly at them in tracks, showing his refusal to back down. Those confrontations gave DTE a fearless aura, because not many rappers dared to make those moves. Whether on stage, in interviews, or in clubs, Alley Boy's name brought tension. Fans respected him for calling out anyone, no matter their status. The beef showed that DTE valued principle and pride over calculated industry plays. The infamous Young LA tattoo incident also shaped how the city viewed duct tape. In 2011, Young LA got a duck tattoo on his face, resembling duct tape branding. Alley Boy saw this as disrespect because the symbol was being used without permission. The crew confronted him directly, and the situation ended violently with video proof spreading online. Young LA was beaten, and the tattoo was marked out with black ink. That moment showed the world how seriously DTE took loyalty and branding. To them, the tape symbol was sacred, and no outsider could claim it lightly. The incident cemented their reputation for enforcing respect, even through physical consequences. Rumors followed DTE everywhere because their movements attracted both fans and investigators. Whispers of extortion floated around clubs, with some saying artists had to check in with DTE. There were also stories of arsons connected to disputes, though many details remained unverified. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories fed into their myth. People believed DTE controlled certain blocks and influenced what outsiders could do in the city. Media outlets began highlighting their reputation, framing them as both a rap crew and a feared presence. For locals, that meant aligning with DTE carried benefits and risks. The name Duct Tape became synonymous with respect backed by intimidation. Journalists noted how DTE stood apart from industry-friendly Atlanta labels like Quality Control. While QC worked with executives in radio consistently, DTE leaned harder into neighborhood credibility. Reporters described how their mixtape drops felt more like street events than corporate releases. The city's coverage often blurred fact and rumor, making it difficult to separate legend from truth. This narrative helped solidify DTE as larger than life because mystery amplified their presence. Even people who never heard a mixtape still knew the name Duct Tape. The blurred line between rap crew and gang became a constant conversation around them. Law enforcement regularly watched DTE, noting that many members had previous arrests. Cases tied to associates brought more attention, with courtrooms repeating their name alongside charges. Though the label described itself as music, the perception outside was often different. People saw them moving deep, defending their name violently, and holding a strong neighborhood base. To the public eye, that was no different than what gangs were known for. The association shaped how police, media, and even other rappers interacted with them. That perception carried both benefits and consequences because respect came quickly, but opportunities came slower. DTE's reputation for fear made them untouchable in some circles. At the same time, mainstream executives hesitated, worried about potential backlash and legal heat. Yet within Atlanta, their name still carried heavy weight. You could not dismiss DTE when discussing the streets that raised Atlanta rap. Their authenticity, beefs, and reputation made sure their story would be remembered far beyond mixtapes. By the early 2010s, DTE had become one of Atlanta's most feared rap crews. Their reputation was shaped by loyalty, aggression, and unfiltered authenticity that people either respected or avoided. For some, they were the embodiment of keeping it real, no matter the cause. For others, they were a dangerous example of music and the streets blending too closely. Either way, Duct Tape Entertainment left no doubt about their place in Atlanta's history. Their myth was built on both fact and rumor, and the city spoke their name with caution. From the beginning, Duct Tape Entertainment walked a line that outsiders struggled to define. Inside Atlanta, they were known as a label, a family, and a respected crew. But for law enforcement, their movements often looked like something bigger than music. Court cases tied their name to violence, and prosecutors repeated Duct Tape Boys in ways that stuck. The label's reputation became harder to separate from rumors when legal language painted them as a gang. One of the earliest high-profile cases tied to their name was the 2011 Athens shooting. The case became known in Georgia legal circles as Thomas v. State. Witnesses said a fight broke out near an Athens apartment complex late that night. Shots were fired, and investigators claimed the shooter had ties to duct tape. The details were messy, with some witnesses contradicting each other about who was present. Prosecutors emphasized the duct tape connection to frame the shooting as organized gang violence. Defense lawyers pushed back, but the damage was already done in public perception. To the streets, it was just another fight turned tragic. But in court, the words Duct Tape Boys carried heavy weight. Another federal case added to the scrutiny when Terry Williams, a self-proclaimed duct tape member, faced charges. The Department of Justice filed documents naming him alongside references to DTE. Williams claimed affiliation with the crew, and prosecutors leaned on that claim to describe his actions. The charges included drug distribution and firearm offenses, all painted as part of Duct Tape Boys' activity. Whether Williams was truly part of the label's inner circle or not, the headlines carried the name. For investigators, his self-description gave them a way to link the music label with criminal enterprise. That blurred line created more confusion between DTE as a rap crew and DTE as a gang. The truth was more complicated because not everyone in DTE was involved in crime. Big Bank Black built the label with business vision, not a desire to create a gang. Trouble was focused on music, pushing his craft while trying to leave the street life behind. Alley Boy lived his truth, but his voice in records did not equal court indictments. Still, outsiders only saw the loudest moments, the beefs, the violence, and the confrontations. They did not see the studio nights filled with family, kids running around, and merch being packed. Those details rarely made the news because courtrooms focused on gun cases and fights. Legal language played a powerful role in shaping how DTE was perceived across Atlanta. Prosecutors labeled them Duct Tape Boys, a phrase that sounded more like a gang than a label. Court transcripts and police reports used that terminology again and again. Over time, those words made their way into articles, headlines, and public conversations. The image of DTE as a gang hardened even when the facts showed a music crew. Years later, the YSL indictment followed the same playbook, framing rap lyrics and crews as organized crime. In many ways, DTE had already lived through that type of scrutiny a decade earlier. The crew themselves denied those portrayals, insisting that DTE was a label first. Big Bank and Alley Boy explained in interviews that they built the brand from music. They admitted their backgrounds were from the streets, but they rejected the idea of being classified as a gang. Alley Boy once argued that rap lyrics were creative expression, not criminal evidence. The crew pointed out that prosecutors targeted black rap groups far more aggressively than other genres. They called it racial bias, saying the system criminalized art whenever it reflected real struggles. Those arguments did not always win in court, but they resonated with fans. For fans, the blurred identity became part of the fascination. Supporters loved DTE's music because it felt authentic, unfiltered, and true to the streets. That same authenticity fed the perception that they were more than a label. People debated online whether they were a gang or just a hard label. Some saw the courtroom accusations as proof of their fearsome reputation. Others defended them, saying law enforcement twisted reality to paint black artists as criminals. Either way, the dual identity of Duct Tape Entertainment became legendary in Atlanta culture. The more prosecutors pushed the gang narrative, the more fans repeated stories that added to the myth. Rumors spread faster than verified facts because every new headline carried the name Duct Tape. The fascination grew with every court appearance and every article that tied them to violence. For DTE, it was both a curse and a strange type of branding. Their name was known across the city for both music and fear. People respected the label, but they also whispered about it like a street organization. That tension followed them everywhere, from nightclubs to news reports. By the mid-2010s, the question of whether Duct Tape Entertainment was a label or a gang had no clear answer. To the crew, they were brothers and artists, chasing respect and money. To the courts, they were a group worth monitoring like a criminal enterprise. That split defined their legacy, even before national audiences saw the YSL trial years later. DTE lived in that blurred space, and fans never stopped debating where the truth really sat. On June 5th, 2022, Atlanta lost one of its most respected voices. Marielle "Trouble" Orr was shot and killed in Conyers, Georgia. The news hit like a shockwave, spreading across the city in minutes. Reports confirmed he had been at the Lake St. James apartment complex. The apartment belonged to a longtime female friend who had invited him over. Trouble was sleeping in bed when the shooter entered, according to police records. Within moments, an argument turned violent, and Trouble's life ended at 34 years old. Authorities named the suspect as 33-year-old Jamichael Jones, a man with prior ties to the woman. Investigators said Jones and the woman had once been romantically involved. According to warrants, Jones entered the apartment without permission and confronted the pair. The confrontation escalated, and Jones fired shots that struck Trouble in the chest. Witnesses told police that Jones then fled the scene immediately afterward. He was arrested later in the week after turning himself in to Rockdale County authorities. The charges included felony murder, aggravated assault, and home invasion. From the beginning, the case divided public opinion about what truly happened. Police called it a crime of passion, tied to jealousy and relationship drama. Some fans accepted that explanation, seeing it as a tragic domestic dispute. Others spread rumors online, suggesting the story went deeper than reports claimed. On social media, speculation about retaliation and hidden enemies grew quickly. Street whispers tied the killing to unresolved tensions, even when no evidence supported those claims. For many, the official reports did not stop the flood of theories and gossip. The city of Atlanta grieved publicly because Trouble had become more than just a rapper. His funeral turned into a gathering of Atlanta's entire rap elite. The service was held at the House of Hope Atlanta, a megachurch in Decatur. Artists like T.I., 2 Chainz, Gucci Mane, and Jeezy all came to pay respects. The turnout showed how much respect Trouble carried across different generations of the Atlanta scene. Big Bank Black delivered an emotional eulogy, struggling through tears as he remembered his brother. He spoke about their bond, their grind, and the legacy Trouble left behind. His words captured both the pain and pride of losing the heart of the crew. Alley Boy carried his grief in a different way, often speaking about Trouble years later. In interviews, Alley admitted the pain had not faded with time. He described how Trouble's presence made the label feel alive, and losing him left a hole. Alley's words came raw, reminding fans that even hardened figures suffer heavy losses. For him, Trouble was not just another member, but family. That bond showed in every reflection, because Alley spoke with loyalty and sadness together. The grief lingered long after the funeral ended, shaping how DTE carried itself afterward. Online, the speculation never slowed down, even after Jamichael Jones faced charges. Blogs and forums repeated rumors of retaliation plots, although no proof ever surfaced. Some posts claimed Duct Tape would answer the killing with force. Others said the crew chose silence to avoid fueling more investigations. Gossip blurred with myth until casual fans could not separate fact from fiction. The streets of Atlanta always carried rumors, but Trouble's death made them spread further. The mix of mourning, confusion, and speculation turned his story into one more layer of legend. For fans, Trouble's death symbolized both the highest visibility and the greatest loss for DTE. At the moment his career had fully crossed into national recognition, tragedy cut it short. His deals with Mike Will and Interscope had positioned him for long-term success. Co-signs from stars like Drake and The Weeknd showed his reach beyond Atlanta. Yet his life ended in a way that reminded everyone of the risks surrounding street reality. Trouble represented the voice of Zone 6, and that voice was silenced suddenly. For the crew, his loss was not just personal, but symbolic. DTE lost the artist who carried their name further than anyone else. The legacy of Trouble remained complicated, balancing music achievements with the myths surrounding his death. Fans replayed his interviews, mixtapes, and studio footage as tributes across social platforms. Murals appeared in Atlanta, painted on walls that once carried his music in speakers. For his community, the loss reminded them of how fragile success could be. For Duct Tape, it meant their greatest moment of recognition was tied to heartbreak. His death closed one chapter of Atlanta rap history, while making his story permanent in the city's memory. After Trouble's death, the crew faced a new chapter that tested everything they had built. The pain was heavy, but Duct Tape Entertainment refused to fade into silence. Their answer came with the Duct Tape Infinity mixtape, a project meant to honor Trouble while regrouping. The tape carried raw emotion, featuring tracks that reminded listeners of the brother they lost. For the crew, it was both a tribute and a declaration that DTE was still alive. The project showed that the brand had no plans of letting grief erase their story. A new generation began stepping forward, determined to keep the name relevant. Among them was Pesh Mayweather, who brought energy and charisma into the spotlight. His sound reflected the streaming era, but still carried the grit that defined the crew. Lil Vailey also emerged, carrying his family ties and representing the continuation of Duct Tape loyalty. DJ Plug added another dimension, providing beats and support that kept their catalog moving. Together they represented the evolution of DTE, moving into a digital landscape while holding on to tradition. The younger members proved that Duct Tape still held strong across generations. Solo ventures also became part of how the brand survived without Trouble. Big Bank leaned heavily into podcasting, building new platforms where his voice carried influence. Veli Sosa pushed personal projects, staying active with business ventures and community moves. Pesh Mayweather found traction through streaming numbers, connecting with fans who never touched physical CDs. These solo pursuits kept the crew's name alive in spaces outside traditional mixtape culture. It showed that DTE understood survival meant adapting to new lanes without losing their roots. The balance was never easy, but the family structure gave them enough strength. The struggle to stay relevant in the streaming era was real for Duct Tape. The music industry had shifted, and the rules of distribution looked different. Handing out CDs no longer carried the same impact when Spotify links were everywhere. Still, DTE found ways to maintain cultural weight even without dominating charts. Their name carried heavy respect in Atlanta, and no new crew could erase that. The loyalty, the history, and the authenticity gave them staying power far beyond numbers. In the streaming era, cultural weight often mattered more than mainstream visibility, and DTE held theirs. Big Bank himself embodied the transition from raw streets to something deeper. His evolution showed how an OG could move from hustling to mentoring without losing credibility. The Big Facts podcast became his most visible platform, gaining national attention across hip-hop circles. Episodes featured conversations with major names like Jeezy, Birdman, and Lil Duval. Those interviews showed Big Bank stepping into the role of interviewer, thinker, and cultural commentator. The tone often shifted from glorifying the past to reflecting on lessons learned. Listeners respected the way he balanced street authenticity with mature perspective. Another platform, Perspectives, allowed Big Bank to speak directly about issues beyond rap. He held discussions about mental health, community growth, and surviving trauma. For someone who once represented fear and authority, this shift carried serious weight. People listened closely because the wisdom came from lived experience, not classroom theory. His voice influenced younger artists who struggled with the same issues he once faced. The respect he earned in the streets gave him credibility in these new conversations. Big Bank's transformation reflected the possibility of growth within hip-hop's toughest figures. Beyond media, Big Bank became active in town halls, philanthropy, and mentoring programs. He showed up in schools and neighborhoods, speaking about decisions and consequences. Community talks placed him alongside pastors, teachers, and civic leaders. His presence showed that transformation was not only possible, but powerful. He pushed conversations about building businesses, mental health awareness, and staying disciplined. The same man who once enforced loyalty through fear now guided people toward reflection. His journey became an example of what growth could look like after years of survival. Big Bank carried the symbol of DTE's maturity into the broader city culture. Duct Tape Entertainment's legacy reached beyond their own circle because their blueprint influenced other Atlanta crews. Slaughter Gang, led by 21 Savage, borrowed from the DTE model of family and loyalty. Hoodrick followed similar patterns, building movements that carried local credibility before mainstream recognition. Gucci Mane's 1017 and later Quality Control also reflected lessons that DTE lived through. The emphasis on independence, authenticity, and control over image came directly from the duct tape philosophy. Even when newer labels found wider success, many acknowledged DTE's early role in shaping the culture. Their influence was baked into the DNA of modern Atlanta hip-hop. Trap authenticity was one of their biggest contributions to the broader scene. At a time when many labels polished their image for executives, DTE doubled down on rawness. They showed that you could own your music, move as a unit, and build respect. Their ownership model, from DVDs to mixtapes to merch, gave others the blueprint. Independence became a trend across Atlanta, but DTE was already moving that way. They taught crews that you did not need mainstream love to hold cultural dominance. Their presence reminded artists that the streets would always reward authenticity first. Still, their legacy carried contradictions that shaped how people viewed them. DTE commanded street respect, but struggled with mainstream visibility at the highest level. The fear they created sometimes limited their opportunities, even as it built their myth. Their legend thrived in rumors, whispers, and street stories more than billboard placements. Yet that myth sustained their name in ways that radio spins never could. Every conversation about Atlanta's hardest crews eventually circled back to duct tape. Their balance of respect and fear became both an advantage and a limitation. In the end, Duct Tape Entertainment became both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. They showed the power of loyalty, authenticity, and raw truth in a city full of labels. They also showed the consequences of living too close to street reality while chasing industry recognition. Their history explained why Atlanta could never be understood by numbers alone. DTE stood for a blueprint that valued loyalty over polish, survival over acceptance, and family over fame. That formula built legends, but also carried a risk that could not be ignored. When people look back at their story, the closing thought remains sharp and clear. Before YSL made national headlines with indictments and debates, Atlanta already had its example. Duct Tape Entertainment showed how music and street codes could hold together like tape. The city already had duct tape binding its culture long before courtrooms tried to define it. DTE's name carried both fear and respect, and that will never fade from Atlanta's memory.